The best thing about this sub is that no one is allowed to question a story. If someone posts it, your only option is to listen and believe. So when I tell you how it happened, you have to take my word for it. Even if you don't believe, you have to nod your head and pretend. You have to listen and believe me, see? So if I were to tell you I killed her because she was horrid, you'll have to accept it as the truth. For once, someone will believe me. She was the school darling. You know the kind. A pretty, smart, middle-class girl that the teachers find to be just so charming. The kind that cries and accuses you of bullying her whenever you try to seek help from anyone for what she's doing to you. I'm not gonna deny that I killed her. There would be no point to it. Everyone already knows I did it, even if they can't prove it. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me try and start over. I went to a public school in the Deep South, where politeness and conformity are key. Those who disregard the social rules here are pretty much shunned. It's a lot like the rest of the world, but with a lot more condescending Christians saying, "I'll pray for you and one day you'll find Jesus." I was one of those kids who didn't fit in. You'd probably assume goth, but it wasn't that. I was really into Renaissance type things. The music, the clothing, it was all very attractive to me. I wore floor-length dresses and skirts, I read the original versions of Grimm's fairy tales, I listened to music of Jacques Desprez, I wore my hair in a French braid tied with a thread that was hidden by a silk ribbon. I also happened to be very, very much into women. It didn't take Corinne long enough to single me out. She took every opportunity to cut at me in a way you couldn't report to the teachers. "Nice clothes," she'd snicker at me. "I just love your hair. It's really well done for someone who can't afford to go to a salon." A poison compliment, one you can't tell to anyone. What would you say? She said my clothes and hair were nice? You'd be laughed right out of the room. So I would just bow my head and keep walking, Fortuna Desperata playing in my head. When she saw I had learned to ignore the snide remark, she started stealing my things. Taking my bag and hiding it, stealing things out of it. Then she moved on to telling every other girl in the school to watch out for me because I might try to make a move on them. I tried to tell the school counselor, but it did no good. She called Corinne in to talk to her, and Corinne sobbed and came up with some story about how she tries so hard to be my friend and how I make fun of her all the time, every trick and lie she had. Like they always did, the counselor fell for it. Why wouldn't she? Corinne was a nice, well-adjusted girl from a nice little family in the burbs. I was not. After that, I stopped trying to tell on her. And she knew then that she could get away with anything. I think the last straw was the day she planted wine in my bag and then told the counselor I had a drinking problem. It was clever. I'll give her that much. A Renaissance obsession makes red wine a very clever choice. It also made me rather angry. A school counselor is not, in my opinion, qualified to diagnose a drinking problem. I base this opinion on the fact that my bottle was proof enough for her to call my mother, despite it being sealed, despite my protests and my insistence that it had been planted, and despite the fact that I was visibly sober and no teacher had ever seen me in any state other than stone sober. It didn't matter. And I was suspended with the strong recommendation that I get help for my addiction. I was told the only reason I wasn't expelled was because I hadn't really caused any trouble up to this point, and they wanted to help, not harm. So I did what felt like the only logical thing at the time. I killed her. I called her mother and set up a meeting. I said I wanted to apologize to Corinne for accusing her of planting the wine. I told her I wanted to bring a nice lunch that we could share before I went off to rehab, which was, of course, a lie, as I had no need for rehab. I showed up at her door in my best dress, a beautiful silk and lace affair with cuff sleeves, with that damn wine bottle, a selection of meats and cheeses, 2 glasses, and a wicker basket. Her mother let me in and led me into the parlor. I sat down at a nice table they had set up for lunch as she went to fetch her daughter. Corinne came down the stairs and into the parlor, and I nearly thought twice about killing her. She was dressed in a long, green velvet gown with flowing sleeves and gold lace at her neck. The dress clung to every curve and dip, and it took quite a bit of restraint to stop my eyes from wandering. I wondered if she'd worn the dress as means of taunting me. She sat opposite me at the table, a smirk forming on her face as I set out the contents of the basket. "So I heard you go into rehab?" She taunted me. "That's good. Get that drinking problem under control." She laughed, tossing her hair. "Don't worry. I'll make sure everyone knows where you've gone. When you get out, maybe I'll give you this dress as a present." So, she had worn it to taunt me. I smiled and pulled the wine out of the basket, followed by the 2 polished crystal glasses. I poured us each a cup and shook 3 heart pills from my right sleeve into her glass. I handed it to her after making a big show of adding and stirring a bit of luster dust to make our wine shimmer. It covered the stirring of the pills rather nicely. "I have enough dresses of my own, Corinne," I said, and smiled as she drained her glass. "Besides, it is bad luck to wear a dead woman's dress." Her face was priceless. She was confused, and then as her chest and arms started to ache, she was panicked. She tried to scream, but she couldn't breathe. She slumped in her chair, her head hitting the table, and soiled herself, as dead people generally do. It was really quite disgusting. I rinsed her glass in the nearest bathroom, then made more shimmering wine. I sat back down on my seat and then began to scream. Her parents rushed downstairs, her mother fainted, her father called the police. The coroner who examined her body found signs of drug abuse. It turns out that she had a coke habit, which he decided must have caused the heart attack. Of course, everyone knows it's really me. Even with all the evidence, they still refuse to believe Corinne was anything but an angel, both in life and in death. You, though, you have no choice but to believe me. It's in the rules. Corinne was horrid. You believe me, don't you?